Mom texted, "Skipping your housewarming. Your sister just moved," I replied. "That's fine." Then I opened the doors to my $6 million ocean villa for everyone who was ever stuck at the end of the table. That night, there was no kids' table, just one long table where everyone saw the horizon. The next day, the Homecraft episode aired. My phone exploded, not because they were proud, but because the whole town was asking why my parents weren't there. My name is Sloane Carrington. I grew up in Amber Field, a town smelling of dry grass and irrigation ditches. So far from any ocean you could forget, water came in bodies larger than a municipal pool. Amber Field was a good place to raise a family, which meant it was a good place to enforce a hierarchy. In our family, the hierarchy was simple. There was Lena, and then there was the rest of us. Lena was the star, my younger sister. She was born with a spotlight attached, one that my parents dutifully angled and polished. I was born first, the trial run, the one built for utility. Our lives were measured in birthdays. Lena's birthdays were town events, stretching over weekends. One year it was a bouncy castle that took up the entire backyard, the generator drowning out all conversation. Another year, it was a pony, rented for 3 hours, its sad eyes reflecting the chaos of screaming 7-year-olds. There were 3-tiered cakes from the expensive bakery downtown, mountains of presents wrapped in shimmering paper, and my parents, flushed with a frantic, performative joy. My birthday usually fell the following Tuesday. It was marked by a small, grocery store cupcake with frosting so sweet it hurt your teeth. "We'll do something bigger next year, Sloane," my mother would say, already clearing the single plate. Things are just so hectic after Lena's party. Next year never came. I'd sit at the kitchen table, tracing a scratch in the laminate countertop with my fingernail, the silence of the house roaring louder than Lena's generator ever had. The scratch was shaped like a tiny, crooked river, going nowhere. I learned to be self-sufficient early. It was a trait my parents actively cultivated, not through encouragement, but through consistent, predictable neglect. When I was 8, I fell from the big oak tree and split my chin open. I walked home, the blood dripping a steady rhythm onto my t-shirt. I found my mother in the driveway, polishing the car. She didn't look up, just grabbed a kitchen towel and pressed it into my hand. "Hold that. You're fine. I have to get this done before Lena's dance class." Later that night, as she dabbed peroxide on the cut, she said the words that would become the wallpaper of my childhood. "You're strong, Sloane. You can always handle it." It was never a compliment. It was a release. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut, giving them permission to walk away, to turn their full attention back to the one who couldn't handle it, the one who demanded their focus. Lena. My strength was their convenience. I was a quiet child, drawn to the logic of how things fit together. I loved the smell of sawdust and the clean, metallic scent of machine oil. I found peace in structure, in systems. When I was 10, I was given an old alarm clock. I spent an entire Saturday taking it apart on the living room floor. I laid out every gear, every spring, every tiny, perfect screw on a dish towel, marveling at the intricate, hidden world inside. My mother found me just as I was about to put it back together. Her face tightened. "Sloane, what is this mess? You've ruined a perfectly good clock. You always have to be making things difficult, taking everything apart." She swept the tiny, precise components into her hand and dumped them in the trash. The loss felt physical, a hollow ache in my chest. I hadn't been making a mess. I had been learning. 2 weeks later, Lena brought home a poster for a class project. It was a piece of purple construction paper with a few facts about dolphins written in crayon. She had glued a handful of silver glitter onto the paper, calling it ocean spray. My father held it up, his voice thick with pride. "Judy, come look at this. It's incredible. Lena is a real artist." He bought a frame for it, that poster, with its random dusting of craft store glitter, hung in our hallway for 5 years. The glitter was art. My gears were a mess. The message was clear. What Lena touched became special. What I touched became debris. The pattern was set, repeated in 1,000 small ways until it became the load-bearing structure of our lives. At the annual Amberfield Spring Festival, Lena, then 12, was in the community dance troupe. She wore a yellow sequined leotard and did a series of clumsy cartwheels on the rickety wooden stage. She missed her cue twice. At the end, my father rushed the stage, lifting her onto his shoulders, his face split in a grin, calling her his little star. The following weekend, my school held its district science fair. I had spent 2 months building a small, solar-powered car from scrap metal, parts of a broken calculator, and a motor I'd salvaged from a discarded toy. It was clumsy, but it worked. Under the harsh gymnasium lights, it zipped across the track, powered by nothing but the sun. I won first prize. I walked home carrying the large blue ribbon and the flimsy certificate. I found my parents in the den, the curtains drawn. They were watching a fuzzy VHS tape of Lena's dance recital from the week before. "I won," I said, holding up the ribbon. My father glanced over, his eyes never leaving the television screen where a small, sequined Lena was wobbling through a turn. "That's great, honey, really great." My mother shushed me. "Sloan, we're trying to watch this. Just put it on the counter, later." As I was heading to bed, she passed me in the hall. "Don't stay up too late working on those things. Sloan, you need your rest." That night, I opened the notebook I kept under my mattress. It was a cheap, spiral-bound book with a flimsy cardboard cover. On a clean page, I wrote down a sentence that had been forming in my mind for years, a truth that felt as solid as the gears I'd lost. "You are invisible until you are useful." It wasn't a complaint. It was an operating manual. At school, I was the one who was good with logistics. I was the stage manager for the school play, the one who built the sets and ran the light board. But I was never considered for a role on stage. I was the one who organized the spreadsheets for the fundraiser, the one who stayed late to count the cash. But I was never the one to give the speech at the assembly. I was dependable Sloan. Practical Sloan. I was the scaffolding, the necessary, unseen structure that allowed the real performance to happen. I was the monkey wrench. You only look for a monkey wrench when something is broken and needs fixing. No one looks at a monkey wrench and calls it beautiful. My only sanctuary was the old woodshed in the far corner of our backyard. It leaned to the left, the wood silvered and splintered by years of neglect. It smelled of rust, damp earth, and ancient, dry fertilizer. It was the one place no one ever followed me. It was mine. Inside, among the broken terracotta pots and dull garden tools, I found my purpose. There was a pile of scrap lumber left by the previous owners, warped 2x4s and sheets of old plywood. I found a handsaw, its teeth rusty but sharp enough. I decided to build a table. It took me a month. I had no plans, no help. I measured by eye. I hammered bent nails straight again. My hands were covered in blisters and splinters. When I was finished, it was the ugliest piece of furniture I had ever seen. It was crooked. It wobbled precariously. One leg was a full inch shorter than the other 3, and I had to prop it up with a brick. But it was the first thing I had ever built that was entirely, completely mine. I sat at that table, in the dusty, spider-webbed light of the shed. I ran my hands over the rough, unfinished planking. I could feel the grain, the imperfections, the ridges where the wood had fought the saw. I leaned my weight on it. It held. In that moment, sitting at a broken table in a falling-down shed, I felt something I never felt in my own home. I felt real. I had a place to sit. I had proof that I existed. This was the rhythm of our family, the constant, quiet, daily repetition of micro-favoritism. It wasn't loud or abusive. It was subtle, like erosion. It was the way their voices lifted when Lena entered a room and flattened when I did. It was the way her accomplishments were framed and mine were put on the counter. It became our defining architecture. Lena was the model, the pristine facade displayed for the world. I was the Kole Van Nung, the wrench, the plumbing, the wiring in the walls, necessary, but hidden, strong, and therefore ignorable. I was the one who could handle it, so I did. I sat in the shed, at my crooked table, and I started to draw plans, not for clocks, not for small cars. I started drawing houses with foundations that wouldn't shift, and rooms that had space for everyone, houses where no one was invisible. My escape from Amber Field came in a thick envelope from the North Cascadia Institute of Architectural Design and Construction Technology. It wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was a full scholarship. It was a golden ticket out, earned with late nights hunched over drafting tables, a portfolio smelling of graphite and fixative, and a desperate, clawing need to build something that could not be ignored. My parents drove me the 6 hours to the city. My mother spent the ride giving Lena advice on her upcoming school play auditions. My father drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, whistling. When we got to the gray, imposing brutalist structure of the dorm, they hauled my 2 suitcases to the curb. My mother hugged me quickly, her cheekbones sharp against my own. "Well, don't get into trouble. Sloan, and call us on Sunday. Lena will want to tell you how her audition went." They were gone in less than 10 minutes. That night, I sat on a thin mattress in a cinder-block room I shared with a girl who was already out at a party. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale air. Outside the single, non-opening window, the city was a galaxy of lights, a vast, humming machine of possibilities. I boiled water in a cheap electric kettle and made a packet of instant noodles. The salty steam misted my face. I sat on the floor, eating from the cup, and pulled out the notebook I'd kept since I was a child, the one with the warped cover. I turned to a fresh page. Under the distant scream of a siren, I sketched a room. It was simple, almost elemental. It had a long table, and around the table, I drew chairs, enough chairs for everyone. I didn't draw people, just the space for them. I wrote at the bottom, "A room where everyone has a seat." The scholarship covered tuition and the dorm, but nothing else. I needed work. I found it in an old industrial park, down by the rail yard. It was a custom woodworking shop called Bower's Mill. The owner, a man named Sal, looked at my soft, uncalloused hands with skepticism. "You're from the Institute?" he grunted. He was missing the tip of his left index finger. "Think you're too good to sweep?" "No, sir," I said. "I'm here to learn." He tossed me a broom. "Floors first, then the dust extraction system. Don't touch a tool." So my education began. For the first 2 months, my hands were raw. I swept oceans of sawdust. I learned the different smells: the sharp, citrus pine of fresh-cut cedar, the sweet, almost cherry-like scent of maple, the bitter tang of walnut. I cleaned resin off planer blades with turpentine until my head spun. I learned to stack lumber, to stain, to apply sealant in long, even strokes, fighting the drip, learning the precise moment the wood was saturated. I watched Sal and the others. I watched how they read the grain of a plank, how they feathered the sandpaper, how they joined 2 pieces of wood with such precision they seemed to melt together. I asked questions, not stupid ones, but specific ones. Why a dovetail there instead of a box joint? What's the moisture content you're aiming for? One afternoon, Sal was struggling with a sketch for a client's bookcase. He was a craftsman, not a designer. "He wants it modern but warm," Sal complained, throwing the pencil down. "What the hell does that mean?" I waited a beat. "It means he wants clean lines, but with a material that feels alive, maybe a rift-sawn white oak with a simple, mitered waterfall edge and a concealed spline for strength. You get the minimal shape, but the grain pattern gives it the warmth." Sal stared at me. He picked up his pencil, looked at his own clunky drawing, and then shoved the graph paper toward me. "Fine, you draw it. If it's bad, you're back on the broom for a month." I drew it, I drafted the cut list, the joinery, and a 3-dimensional perspective. He built it exactly as I'd drawn. The next week, I was off the broom. He put me on the joiner, and then the lathe. My hands changed. The blisters turned to calluses. I learned the rhythm of the work, the hum of the transformer, the kick of the saw. the heavy, satisfying thud of a mallet seating a joint. It was the rhythm of a bua, a hammer, driving a nail, direct, final, true. My classes at the Institute were the other half of my life, the world of theory. We studied ergonomics, structural engineering, the history of brutalism, the physics of light. My biggest hurdle was technology. The 3D modeling and rendering software required computers with power I couldn't afford. The school's labs were always full. I bought a used desktop tower, a beast that weighed 50 pounds and sounded like a jet engine. It overheated, constantly. I was in the middle of rendering a complex blueprint for my midterm, a community center. The processor fan was screaming. The case was hot to the touch. The progress bar was at 62%, and then the screen went black. The machine shut down. I had lost 6 hours of work. I sat there in the dark, the smell of hot plastic in the air. I didn't cry. I waited. When the machine was cool, I rebooted. I opened the file, or what was left of it, and I started again. From then on, I set an alarm on my phone. I would work for 55 minutes. Then the alarm would ring. I would stop, save my work, and shut the machine down. I would go get a coffee, or read a chapter on concrete tensile strength, or just stare out the window at the rain. For 10 minutes, then I would go back. 55 on, 10 off. I paced myself. I managed the heat. I refused to let the machine, or my own exhaustion, burn me out. I learned to respect the limits of my tools, and in doing so, pushed past my own. I needed money, but I also needed experience. I started taking on small freelance jobs. I printed out flyers with tear-off tabs and pinned them on the bulletin boards at grocery stores. Sloan Carrington Design and Build. Small spaces, smart solutions. My first job was a bathroom renovation in a pre-war apartment building. The pay was almost nothing. The space was a closet. The old hexagonal tile was cracked and mildewed. The client, a young resident doctor, just wanted it to feel clean. I spent a weekend pulling up the old floor. I found water damage in the subfloor. I replaced it. I learned about plumbing code, the hard way. I retiled the entire space, using large format, light gray tiles on the floor and a simple white subway tile on the walls, laid in a herringbone pattern to draw the eye up. I built a custom, floating vanity from a single piece of reclaimed teak to create the illusion of space. It was brutal work, but when the doctor saw it, she just stood in the doorway and said, It's so much bigger. How did you do that?" I did a studio apartment for a student, building a loft bed with a desk and storage underneath, creating 2 rooms out of 1. Then I got a call from a woman opening a small coffee shop in a neighborhood called Hollow Pine. It was my first commercial gig. The budget was tiny. She had a name. The Daily Grind, and a good espresso machine. Nothing else. I spent a week just sitting in the empty space, watching the light. I watched how it moved across the floor in the morning, how it hit the back wall in the afternoon. I sourced salvaged bowling alley lanes for the countertops, their history embedded in the scuffs and arrows. I built the bar myself at Sal's shop. Working after hours, I designed simple, plywood and pipe shelving. The project taught me about the flow of people. It taught me how the texture of a countertop can make someone want to stay, how the warmth of a light bulb can make a conversation feel private. My professor for material studies, a formidable woman named Alvarez, reviewed my portfolio at the end of that year. She flipped through the photos, the tiny bathroom, the loft bed, the coffee shop. She saw the technical drafts from my overheating computer. She saw the joinery sketches from the wood shop. She stopped at a photo of the coffee shop, at the way the reclaimed wood of the bar met the exposed brick of the original wall. I had left a reveal, a small gap, a shadow line, to honor both materials. She tapped the photo. "You're the only one in my class who isn't trying to hide the scars," she said. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Everyone else wants to build something new, something perfect. They want to tear down the old You see the hurt in a house first. You see the stress points, the bad repairs, the neglect, and you're not afraid of them. You work with them. That's a rare skill." She gave me an A, but her words were worth more. She had given me a language for what I did. I didn't just build. I listened to the pain of a space, and I helped it heal. I graduated with honors and a portfolio full of real, built things. I had saved just enough money to rent a tiny studio in the dockside quarter. It was a single room above a fish processing plant. The building vibrated when the trucks came in, and the entire place smelled of brine and diesel. The roof leaked in 2 places, and I kept buckets under the drips. But it was mine. I painted the walls white. I built a drafting table that folded against the wall. I put my name on the door in simple, black vinyl letters, Sloane Carrington. My first official project as a graduate came from a flyer I'd left at a community center. A woman named Mrs. Gable, a retired widow. Her husband had passed away a year prior, and she was left rattling around in a house that was too big, filled with his things. She wanted to turn his old office, a dark, wood-paneled room at the back of the house, into an art studio for herself. When I entered the room, the air was dead. Heavy curtains blocked the light. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space. It felt like a tomb. "I just want to paint," she whispered, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts. "But I can't, in here." I didn't just suggest new paint. I proposed knocking out the back wall and installing a floor-to-ceiling glass door. I designed storage that would hide all her supplies, but keep them accessible. We pulled up the thick carpet and found original hardwood, which I sanded and sealed in a light, natural finish. It took 3 weeks. Mrs. Gable stayed with her sister. I brought in a small crew, and I did the finishing work myself. When she returned, I opened the door for her. The late afternoon sun poured into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The space was bright, open, and alive. Her easel stood in the center, waiting. She walked into the middle of the room and just stood there, her hands clasped at her chest. She turned in a slow circle. She didn't say anything for a full minute. I held my breath. Then, she let out a long, slow sigh, a sound that seemed to come from the deepest part of her. "Oh, my," she said, her voice watery. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "It feels like I can breathe again." I burst into tears. All the nights working on the overheated computer, all the splinters, all the sawdust, all the exhaustion, it all collapsed into that one moment. I wasn't just building a room, I was giving someone air. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Sloane, how are you?" "I'm good. Mom, I just finished a project." "Oh, that's nice," she said, her voice distracted. "Listen, I just wanted to call with the news. Lena got the lead in the regional play, the Starlight Review. Isn't that wonderful? Your father and I are just so proud. She's going to need a new headshot, of course, and we were wondering." I stood in my leaky studio, the smell of the ocean and dead fish rising from the street. I listened to her talk about Lena for 10 minutes. I said, "That's great, and good for her," at the right intervals. When she hung up, I looked at my hands, still raw from the sanding, stained with sealant. I had learned how to build walls, how to install windows, how to let the light in. I had also learned, finally, how to not stand by the door, waiting for them to ask about my day. I had learned how to not hope. I locked the door to my studio and went to sleep. The studio above the fish plant lasted exactly 1 year, the day I turned 24. I signed a lease on a space that would have terrified me a year earlier. It was a defunct warehouse in the old Maritime District, a 3,000-square-foot cavern of corrugated steel, greasy clerestory windows, and concrete floors stained with decades of unknown industry. The air smelled of cold iron and welding flux. I spent my entire savings, the profit from Mrs. Gable's studio and the coffee shop, on the deposit and the first month's rent. I hung a simple, sandblasted metal sign by the roll-up door. It read, "Second Horizon." The name was a promise. It was a rejection of the idea that anything, or anyone, was finished. It was a commitment to finding the value past the initial damage, past the first, failed life. My philosophy was simple: rebirth for the discarded. I didn't want new materials. I wanted the things no one else saw. I haunted demolition sales and shipyard auctions. I bought water-stained white oak from a mill that had flooded. Its grains stained a ghostly, beautiful gray. I salvaged rusted I-beams from a factory being torn down. I bought entire sets of brass portholes from decommissioned fishing boats, their glass thick and imperfect. My art was finding the strength in the scar. The work was brutal. This wasn't design theory. This was labor. My hands, which had been calloused at Sal's, were now permanently scarred. I learned to weld, the sting of ozone in my nostrils, the blinding blue-white light seen through the mask. I learned to drive a forklift, the satisfying hydraulic lift and heavy, solid thud as a pallet of reclaimed Douglas fir hit the concrete. I was my own crew for the first 6 months. I hauled the planks. I ran the table saw until my arms hummed with the vibration. And I did the books. This was the other, colder side of the labor. I sat at a metal desk under a single bare bulb, the warehouse vast and dark around me, hunched over spreadsheets. I balanced the cost of marine-grade plywood against a client's fixed budget. I learned about payroll, insurance, liability. The fear was constant. A low-grade electrical hum in my stomach. I was betting on myself. And the stakes were no longer just my own survival, but the existence of the business itself. There were crunch times, deadlines that seemed impossible. One project, a kitchen remodel for a baker, required a massive, single-piece soapstone countertop. The delivery was delayed. The client was frantic. I ended up fabricating the custom ventilation hood myself, working for 36 hours straight, the smell of cut steel and degreaser filling the shop. I didn't go home. I didn't even go to my desk. I fell asleep on a workbench, my head pillowed on a pile of shop towels, the smell of wood glue and metal dust clinging to my clothes. I woke up at dawn, my neck a knot of pain, but the hood was finished. It was perfect. Word began to spread. I didn't advertise. I couldn't afford to. My clients became my marketing. They were people like me, people who appreciated the story and the materials. They were quiet, thoughtful people who didn't want the sterile, white box perfection they saw in magazines. The reputation of Second Horizon grew, passed along in coffee shops and grocery store aisles. The phrase I heard most often, the one that made it back to me, was, "It's not flashy, but the house feels warm." Warm. The word settled in me. It was the antithesis of the glitter poster. It was the opposite of the cold, laminate countertop in amber field. It was the feeling I had been chasing since the woodshed. I wasn't just building, I was building warmth. My first major commission, the one that changed the trajectory of the business, was a cabin on the Gray Coast. It was a treacherous location, a small plot of land on a low, windswept bluff overlooking the Pacific. The client was a poet who wanted a storm-watching retreat. She didn't want to fight the weather. She wanted to be in it. I spent a month on the design. I used reclaimed cypress, a wood known for its resistance to rot, its silvery gray patina when weathered by salt. The footings had to be twice as deep as code required, anchored directly into the bedrock. I designed a cantilevered deck, its structure exposed, built from galvanized steel I-beams I'd salvaged from an old pier. The windows were marine-grade, triple-paned, designed to withstand 100-mile-an-hour winds. The whole structure was an exercise in resilience. The build took 4 months. I was on site every day, the wind tearing at my clothes, the salt spray crusting on my skin. I hammered the last copper cap onto the chimney, flashing myself, my fingers numb, the sky over the ocean the color of a fresh bruise. The night we handed over the keys, I drove back to the city in my old, rattling pickup truck. It was late, past midnight. I had the windows down, the cold night air rushing in. I was driving along the coastal highway, the dark mass of the ocean on my left, the cliffs on my right. The cab of the truck was filled with the smell of the sea, a deep, primal smell of salt and iodine. Underneath it was the lingering, sharp scent of the cedar I'd used for the cabin's interior closet. That combination, salt and wood, It was the smell of my work, my ocean, my earnings. It was the smell of a life I had built from nothing. I inhaled it, and for the first time, I knew the precise, physical scent of freedom. I felt a sudden, stupid surge of hope. I felt the win. I wanted, just for a second, to share it. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and dialed home. My mother picked up on the third ring. "Sloan, it's late." "Hi, Mom? I know. I just finished a big project, the cabin on the coast. I wanted to tell you, it's done." There was a pause, the sound of a television in the background. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Is it cold there? You sound like you're in a tunnel." "I have the windows down," I said, my voice smaller. "Well, that's not safe. Listen, you'll never guess what happened. Lena got a call back. For a regional car commercial. She'd be the woman on the street. Can you imagine? Your father and I think this could be the one that really gets her noticed. She's just so charismatic, you know? The camera just loves her." I stared ahead at the white line of the highway, disappearing and reappearing in my headlights. The smell of salt and wood suddenly felt thin. That's great, Mom, really. We're just so excited. Anyway, I should go. We're watching a movie. You should try to get more rest. Sloan, you always sound so tired." "Okay, Mom. Good night." I hung up. I didn't pull over. I didn't cry. I just let out a single, sharp exhale. It wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of a spring uncoiling, of a pressure valve releasing. It was the sound of the last, stupid ember of hope being extinguished. I put the phone back on the seat, and in that cold, rushing, empty air, a new resolve settled over me. It was hard and clean as the steel beams I'd anchored to the rock. I was done. I was done waiting for them to see me. I was done hoping they would ask. This cabin, this work, it wasn't for them. It was for me. I would build something in my own name, so large and so true that their validation would be irrelevant. It would be a speck of dust next to the structure I was raising. I thought of that crooked, wobbly table in the shed. That was about survival. That was about proving I existed. This was different. This was about legacy. My ambition, which had been a quiet, steady burn, now roared to life. I didn't just want a business. I wanted an anchor. I wanted to build a house. My house. A house that would be the physical manifestation of the Second Horizon philosophy. A house that would be a testament to seeing the beauty in the discarded. A house, I thought, as the truck ate up the miles, where the table was the center of the home, a table where everyone had a seat, a table where no one was an afterthought, a table where no one was left at the end, and no one was hidden in the kitchen. I got back to the warehouse at 3 a.m. and fired up my old computer. I didn't sleep. I started designing. My business was growing, but I was still invisible to the mainstream. I was too small, too niche, so I started documenting my work. I wasn't a photographer, and I hated the slick, overproduced world of social media, so I was just honest. I started a blog on my website. I took photos with my phone. I showed the before. I showed the rot. I showed the 30-year-old linoleum, the water-damaged drywall, the hurt that Professor Alvarez had talked about. I showed the spaces that families had abandoned. Then I showed the after, but I also showed the during. I posted photos of the process, a close-up of a perfectly cut dovetail, a video of my welder laying a clean bead. I wrote about the problems. I wrote, "We opened this wall and found the main plumbing stack was completely corroded. Had to replace the whole thing. It added 2 days. But it's right." This brutal, unpolished honesty was, it turned out, a marketing strategy. In a world of filters and fake perfection, my feed was real. It smelled of sawdust. People responded, other builders, architects, homeowners who were tired of being lied to. My little blog, my raw Instagram feed, started getting passed around. I didn't notice. At first, I was too busy working. I saw the follower count tick up. I saw comments from designers in cities I'd never been to. And among the new followers, there was one I didn't recognize. It didn't have a person's name. It was just a simple, professional logo. Homecraft Network. I saw it, shrugged, and figured it was a corporate bot, scraping for content. I had no idea it was a senior producer. I had no idea they had been silently watching my feed for 3 months. They weren't looking at my follower count. They were looking at my work. They were watching my before and after stories. They were reading my honest captions. And they had just saved the post about the Gray Coast cabin, the one with the cypress gleaming silver in the stormlight. It took me 2 years to find it. Not to find a plot of land, but to find the right one. I had driven the coast from border to border, looking for a place that others had dismissed. I was walking a stretch of coastline I'd never seen on a map, a place the locals called Greywater Cove. It wasn't a beach. It was a wound in the earth, a jagged cut of stone cliffs dropping 60 feet to a violent, churning surf. And there, perched on the most dramatic, windswept precipice, was a ruin. It had been a tinderbox shack, maybe a fishing lookout, built half a century ago. The salt had eaten the structure alive. The corrugated roof was a lacework of orange rust. The windows were gone, jagged, missing teeth. The decking had collapsed, its boards scattered on the rocks below. It was an obituary written in rotting wood and oxidized metal. Any sane developer, any sane person, would have seen the liability, the teardown, the impossible challenge of the location. They saw the decay. I stood there, the wind whipping my hair across my face, tasting the salt on my lips. I saw what they couldn't. I saw the way the original builder had anchored the main posts directly into the bedrock. I saw the skeleton. I saw the framework that had endured 50 years of relentless, horizontal gales. Others saw rust. I saw bones waiting for rebirth. I bought it within a week. I liquidated my savings. I took out a business loan against Second Horizon, leveraging every asset I had, every drop of goodwill I had earned from the coffee shop and the Gray Coast cabin. I bet the entire company on this one piece of unsalvageable rock. My crew, the small, tight-knit team I'd built at the warehouse, thought I was insane, until I walked them through the plan. "We aren't tearing it down," I said, unrolling the blueprints on the hood of my truck, the wind snapping at the corners. "Not all of it." I pointed to the foundation. It was nice, a local metamorphic stone, hard as iron, that the original builder had patiently pieced together. "This stays. This is our anchor. This is the history." I pointed to 2 massive dark beams supporting the collapsed roofline. They were original Douglas fir, probably old-growth timber, now petrified by 4 decades of salt air. They were warped, but they were strong. "These stay. We pull them. We treat them. We use them as the central spine." My philosophy was my business. Rebirth. You don't erase the history of a place. You anchor to it. The concept I had drafted during those late nights at the warehouse was built on a duality: absolute strength and total transparency. The ocean was the enemy, but it was also the entire point. I didn't want to look at it. I wanted to live in it. The house would be a fortress of glass. The entire ocean-facing side, a 70-foot span, would be a wall of frameless, structural glass panels. But they wouldn't be static. I designed them on a hidden, marine-grade steel track, the kind used for aircraft hangars. With the touch of a button, the entire wall could slide away, collapsing into a pocket in the stone foundation, opening the whole living space to the wind, the sound, the spray. This was the challenge, building a structure strong enough to withstand a winter storm, yet light enough to disappear. Inside, the materials had to be just as elemental. The kitchen island was not granite, not quartz. I sourced a single, 9-foot slab of volcanic basalt, honed to a matte black, its surface pitted with tiny imperfections that felt like the surface of the moon. It was a piece of the Earth's core, set against the chaos of the water. The staircase was my personal statement. I wanted it to fly. I designed it out of folded, 1/4-inch plate steel, welded into a single, seamless ribbon. It would have no visible supports. It would be a floating staircase. But that was a lie. The strength was invisible. The entire structure cantilevered from massive steel supports I had engineered and hidden within the 2-foot thickness of the main wall. It was my old thesis. The strongest things are the ones you cannot see. To complete the effect, the terrace railing, I refused to have pickets or wood. I wanted nothing between the eye and the horizon. I engineered a cantilevered glass windscreen, thick, laminated panels bolted directly into the stone substrate of the cliff edge. When you stood on the terrace, the glass disappeared, and the blue of the sky seemed to pour directly into the blue of the ocean. It was an infinity edge for the heavens. I couldn't do this with a conventional crew. I needed artisans. I needed people who understood the sea. My team was small, and they were the best. There was Cal. He was the lead carpenter, a master of joinery who had built fishing boats his whole life. He was skeptical of my designs until he saw my technical drafts for the joinery. He squinted at them, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. A concealed spline joint, but with a marine epoxy resin bed, he murmured. It'll hold. He became my right hand. There was Lydia, a 4th-generation roofer. She understood water. She didn't just follow code. She followed the wind. She taught me about copper flashing, how to solder it so it would expand and contract with the temperature swings, how to create a waterproof envelope that breathed. And there was Miguel. He was my welder, my steel artist. He was the one who brought the staircase to life, his welds so clean they looked like liquid silver. He understood the invisible strength. He was the one who fabricated the massive steel chassis for the sliding glass walls, testing it 100 times until it moved with the silence of a whisper. This was not a desk job. I didn't direct from afar. I was on that cliff for 3 years. I was in a hard hat and harness, strapped to the scaffolding, the wind trying to peel me from the wall. My hands, which I thought were tough, were shredded anew by rebar, by stone, by the raw, unfinished edges of the steel. I was the architect, but I was also the quality control. When the massive glass panels arrived on a specialized crane, a storm brewing on the horizon, I was the one who climbed the rig to check the tension. I personally inspected the application of the marine-grade flexible sealant, a sticky, black polymer that was our primary defense against water intrusion. I ran my finger along every single seam. Cal, Lydia, and Miguel didn't see me as a boss. They saw me as the first one on the site and the last one to leave. We had setbacks. A flash storm in our first year flooded the foundation before the concrete cured, forcing us to repour half of it. The basalt island cracked during installation, and we had to wait 6 months for a new one to be quarried, but we built. The true test came in our second winter. The house was framed, the glass was in, but the interior was still raw. The worst storm in a decade was rolling down the coast. The weather service called for hurricane-force winds, gusts up to 100 miles an hour. Cal wanted to evacuate the site. Sloan, if those windows fail, the pressure differential will tear the roof off. It's not worth it. They won't fail, I said. I stayed alone. The storm hit at 2 a.m. It was a physical assault. The sound was a primal scream. The wind didn't whistle. It roared, a deep, vibrating bass note that shook my bones. The rain wasn't rain. It was a horizontal barrage, pellets of ice and water hitting the 70-foot glass wall like shotgun spray. The house groaned. It was the sound of a living thing bracing, of steel settling, of wood finding its equilibrium. I walked the dark, unfinished rooms with a high-lumen flashlight. I was terrified, but I was also, in a strange, feral way, exhilarated. This was the test. I put my hand on the glass. It was vibrating. A deep thrum, but it was cold and solid. I aimed my flashlight beam into the pockets, at the seals. Dry. I checked the corners where the steel met the stone. Dry. I went to the roofline, where Lydia's copperwork was hidden, checking for the smallest drip. Nothing. I sat on the concrete floor, my back against the wall, and I listened to the ocean try to tear my house down, and fail. I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me, a feeling I had only ever touched once before, in the shed, at my broken table. I wasn't inspecting a job site. I was protecting my home. It took 3 years. 3 years of my life, every day, poured into that rock. The day the final inspection was scheduled, I was sick with nerves. The inspector was a grizzled county veteran who had seen everything. He walked the site for 4 hours. He checked the footings, the electrical panels, the plumbing gradients, the complex engineering of the cantilevered deck. He ran his hand along Miguel's welds. He finished, his clipboard in hand, and just stood on the terrace, looking at the seamless line where the sky met the sea. He turned to me, expressionless. "In my 30 years on this coast," he said, "I've never seen a build this complex. I've been looking for an hour for just one thing to write up, one single violation." He clicked his pen, signed the bottom of the certificate, and handed it to me. "It's white glove clean, Ms. Carrington. This isn't a house, it's a fortress. Congratulations." When he left, I was alone in the finished space. The scent of sawdust and sealant was gone, replaced by the smell of plaster curing, of new wood, and the faint, clean smell of the ocean breeze. I went back to my truck. In the bed, wrapped in a blanket, was the last piece. It was the table from the shed, my crooked, wobbly, first ever project. I had brought it up from Amber Field on my last brief visit home, pulling it from the collapsing shed without a word to anyone. I had spent a week in the warehouse at Second Horizon restoring it. I didn't fix the wobble. I didn't correct the uneven legs, but I had sanded it. I worked my way from rough, 80 grit paper down to a 400 grit, polishing the rough planking until the wood grain, hidden for decades, emerged. It was smooth as silk, but still bore the scars of my first clumsy saw cuts. I carried it inside. I walked past the volcanic island, past the steel staircase, and into the small study I had built for myself. It was a simple room, with one wall of glass looking north up the rugged coastline. I placed the small, scarred table in the center of the room. It was the only old thing in a house of new, but it was the anchor. It was my touchstone. It was the proof. I lived in the house for 6 months before I told anyone. I didn't post it on the Second Horizon blog. I didn't send a picture to a magazine, and I certainly did not tell my family. This was mine. It was the first thing I had ever built that had not been touched by their expectations, their indifference, or their glitter. It was sacred, and I would not let them compromise its sanctity. The house had been finished for 6 months. I had lived in it. My only companion, the sound of the ocean and the hum of the ventilation system. The silence was a balm. The fortress had held. The Homecraft Network producer, the one who had been silently following my blog, had finally reached out. They were ecstatic. They had seen the build site, and they wanted to feature the finished villa for their new Prestige series. Coastal Rebirths. We had filmed for 3 weeks, a quiet, respectful process. The episode was scheduled to air. "We need a wrap party," the producer said. "Something to show the house being used, a housewarming." The word felt foreign. Housewarming, a tradition from a life I didn't recognize, but I agreed. It was the proper, professional thing to do. It was the final beat of the story. So I did the one thing I had trained myself not to do. I hoped. I called my parents. I called Lena. I invited them to the official housewarming. I told them the date, Saturday, the 5th. I told them the Homecraft crew would be there for an hour to get a few lifestyle shots before leaving us to a private family dinner. This was it. The big one. The blue ribbon. The first prize. The $6 million. Oceanfront. Cantilevered proof. I waited. The read receipts appeared. For 2 days. Silence. Then, on Friday afternoon, I was standing on the terrace, watching a storm build far out at sea. My phone chimed on the basalt counter inside. I walked in, my bare feet cold on the stone, and picked it up. It was a text from my mother. "Going to have to skip the housewarming. Your sister just moved into her new apartment in the city. It's a big weekend for her, and she needs help hanging pictures. We're driving down to help her." I read the text twice. An apartment, hanging pictures. I looked up from the small, bright screen. My gaze traveled past the invisible glass railing, across the 60 feet of churning, gray-green water, to the absolute, unbroken line of the horizon. The storm was turning the sky a deep, profound color of bruised purple. The house was silent, anchored to the bedrock, unmoving. I felt the last gear click into place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the hot sting of tears I remembered from childhood. It was the cold, clean finality of a deadbolt sliding home. It was the realization that I had spent my entire life trying to get a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I realized I was finally completely done waiting. My thumbs moved. I typed back one single, simple reply. That's fine. I set the phone down on the counter. I did not throw it. I did not text Lena. I did not call my father. Instead, I opened my contacts. I scrolled past the A's, past Dad, Lena, Mom. I scrolled down to the people I had kept in my life, the ones who, like me, had been relegated to the edges. My first call was to my cousin, Eli. He was the artistic one in our extended family, a brilliant photographer whose work my father always dismissed as a nice hobby. He was always asked to sit at the kids' table at Thanksgiving, even when he was 25, to make room for the adults. Eli, I said, my voice clear and steady. Sloan? What's up? Are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm having a dinner, tomorrow night, at my new place. The big house? The one you've been building? It's not a party, Eli. It's a real dinner, and I want you to bring your new portfolio. The one you've been afraid to show anyone. There was a silence. Sloan, are you sure? Yes. And Eli? There's no kids' table. My next call was to Rachel, my old friend from the Institute, the one who had the best ideas, but the quietest voice, the one whose work was brilliant but always overshadowed by the louder men in our class. Rachel, it's Sloan. Cancel whatever you're doing tomorrow. My next call was to my old neighbor from Amber Field, Marion, a lovely woman who had been excommunicated from the local social circle after a messy public divorce. She was too complicated for dinner parties now. Marion, I'm sending a car for you tomorrow. No, I will not take no for an answer. Then, Uncle Ray, my father's brother, a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, who was always treated with a polite chill, the blue-collar relative who made my mother uncomfortable. Uncle Ray, I need you here. I want you to see the joinery on the main beams. The list grew. My Grandma Ruth, the only one who ever sent me $5 in the mail for my birthday, my old boss, Sal, who had taught me the smell of maple, Mrs. Gable, the widow whose studio I had built, the one who taught me what air meant. I put down the phone. Within 10 minutes, a new text chain had already started. One I wasn't in. It was Eli, talking to Rachel. I'm heading to Sloan's. She's having a dinner. Me too. She said it's for real. The message began to spread. A quiet, invisible network of the unseen. A new rumor. Sloan Carrington is having a dinner. It's the long table with no privilege. I opened my laptop, the one that didn't overheat anymore. I opened a new file. I was an architect. I knew how to make a blueprint. This would be a blueprint for an emotion. The file was titled, The Long Table. Section 1. Food. I called Margaret, the best chef in the coastal town nearby. Margaret, it's Sloan. I'm canceling the catering order for tomorrow. Ms. Carrington? The network party? The canapes? Gone. I'm having a different event. I don't want food that impresses. I want food that welcomes. I want it abundant. I want it warm. I want the kind of meal you'd make for a family you actually like. She laughed. I know exactly what you mean. Slow roasted, root vegetables, fresh bread, family style, no tiny plates. Exactly, I said. No tiny plates. Section 2. Music. I called the local duo, Lucas and June, a guitarist and a violinist I'd heard at the farmer's market. Lucas? Sloan Carrington, can you be at my house tomorrow at 7? No, I don't want the classical set. I want the music you write yourselves, the stuff that sounds like the coast. Section 3. Atmosphere. I walked through the house. The main lighting was recessed, minimalist, and cold. I went to my workshop, the one I'd built below the house, and pulled out 3 massive boxes of string lights, the kind with large, warm, golden yellow bulbs. I spent the next hour hanging them, stringing them low across the ceiling of the great room, letting them drape down the concrete walls. I wanted the light to be low, warm, close. Enough light to dance, I wrote in my blueprint. I went to the entryway. I threw out the single, austere orchid that had been there for the cameras. I replaced it with a cluster of 20 candles. I had bought them months ago. A custom scent, salt and sandalwood, the smell of the ocean and the smell of the workshop, the smell of my freedom. I lit them. The sterile entryway was instantly transformed. It felt sacred. Section 4. Guests and rooms. This was the most important part. I would not let them drive home on the dark coastal highway. This was not a visit. This was a sanctuary. I went to each of the 4 guest suites I had built. I went to the first room, the one with the north-facing view. This would be for my Aunt Marianne, a quiet woman who loved to read, but was married to a man who thought poetry was frivolous. I went to my bookshelf and pulled a new, leather-bound collection of the very poets she loved. I placed it on the pillow. I went to the second room, the one overlooking the rock garden. This was for Grandma Ruth. I went to my kitchen and found the tin of rare loose-leaf silver-tip tea she always complained she couldn't find in Amber Field. I placed it on the nightstand with a simple, ceramic cup. I went to the third room, the one with the fireplace. This was for Uncle Ray. He was always cold, always rubbing his hands together in my parents' drafty house. I took the heavy, hand-woven wool blanket, the one the color of the cliffs, from my own bed and folded it at the foot of his. I made a blueprint for being seen. When I was done, when the house was warm and smelled of sandalwood, when the lights were low and the music was arranged, I picked up my phone one last time. I created a new group text. I added Eli, Rachel, Marion, Uncle Ray, Grandma Ruth, Mrs. Gable, Sal, Aunt Marianne. The message was simple. Saturday, 6 o'clock, my house, come as you are, dinner is at 7, and just so we are all clear, no one sits at the edge of the table. They arrived just as the sun began to surrender to the ocean. The first car to pull up the long gravel drive was Eli's, his old hatchback rattling in protest. Then Marion's minivan. The kids already pressed against the glass. One by one, they came. Sal, in his work truck, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt. Uncle Ray, driven by Aunt Marianne. And finally, Grandma Ruth, who stepped out of the town car I had sent, her small frame wrapped in her best coat. I had slid the great glass wall entirely into its pocket. The house was open. The barrier between inside and outside was gone, and the cool, salt-heavy air of the evening moved freely through the space, mixing with the warmth building inside. The first thing they saw was the table. It was the centerpiece of my life, the physical manifestation of the blueprint in my head. I had built it myself at Second Horizon, a single 20-foot plank of reclaimed white oak, sanded so smooth it felt like water. It was placed perfectly parallel to the horizon. There was no centerpiece, just a simple, sand-colored linen runner. As the sun dipped, the last, horizontal light of the day poured in, striking the simple, heavy-bottomed crystal glasses I had set at each place. The light shattered, casting reflections on the wood, making the water inside each glass look like a drop of liquid gold. The first thing they smelled was not the food. It was the house itself. I had placed large, simple ceramic pots in the entryway and on the terrace, filled not with flowers, but with branches of white eucalyptus, silvery green olive branches, and bundles of dried, smoky blue lavender. It was a clean smell, a scent of earth and minerals and air. It was the smell of the coastline, brought inside. Then, from the open kitchen at the far end of the room, came the second layer of scent. Margaret, my chef, was in her element, She wasn't hiding behind swinging doors. She was part of the room. The sound of butter and minced garlic sizzling in a hot pan was a form of welcome. On the massive, 6-burner range, a pan of root vegetables was roasting, and on the grill, the main course, thick fillets of salmon, roasting on cedar planks. The wood hissed and crackled, releasing a cloud of aromatic, sweet smoke that mingled with the garlic and the lavender. It was the smell of a home that was active, generous, and ready. Lucas and June were already playing, tucked in a corner near the open wall. The music was not an intrusion. It was a texture. Lucas's guitar was a low, rhythmic thrum, a chord structure that felt more like a heartbeat than a melody. June's violin was a high, thin thread of silver, a sound as fine and strong as silk. And underneath them both, the eternal bass line, the ocean. The waves were not gentle. They were the sound of deep, powerful water meeting rock, a constant, rhythmic crash and sigh that anchored the entire evening. The music and the waves were in conversation. Marion's 2 children, a boy and a girl, both under 10, stood frozen at the entryway, their eyes wide. Then, the boy, Leo, saw the pool. He gasped. In the twilight, the infinity edge was a perfect mirror of the darkening sky. The water was lit from within, a soft turquoise glow, and it truly looked as if it were pouring directly into the dark, churning ocean 60 feet below. "Mom, can we?" the girl whispered, pulling on Marion's hand. They both looked at me, terrified. Marion started to shush them. "Kids, no, don't be rude. We're not." I knelt. "It's okay," I said, my voice low. "It's called an infinity pool. It looks like it falls off, but there's a very wide, safe ledge just underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's there. We'll swim tomorrow, in the daylight, I promise. But tonight, there is a strict rule." They both tensed, expecting to be reprimanded. "You must," I said. "Try the chocolate lava cakes Margaret is making for dessert. It's a house rule." Leo giggled. Marion let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the divorce. I stood up and touched her arm. "Your room is this way. I'll take your bags." This was the most important part of the blueprint. This was the antidote to the guest room in Amber Field that felt like an attic. I took each of them to their room personally. I walked Uncle Ray down the stone hallway to the room with the fireplace. "I put you in here. Uncle Ray, I know you're always cold. The flue is open, and the wood is dry." He just touched the rough, wool blanket I had left for him, the one from my own bed. He nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you, Sloane. It's a good room." I took Aunt Marianne to the north-facing room. "The reading light here is the best in the house," I told her, pointing to the chair and the small, leather-bound book on the nightstand. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the gold-leaf title, and looked at me with tears in her eyes. I took Sal to the room with the terrace overlooking the rock garden. "I figured you'd appreciate the stonework. Sal, it's all local nice." He just grunted, but he ran his hand along the door jamb, checking the fit, and gave me a curt, respectful nod. I saved Grandma Ruth for last. I walked her to the quietest room, the one with the single, perfect view of the cliffs. The silver-tipped tea was on the nightstand. She was quiet. She walked the room, not looking at the view, not looking at the furniture. She was looking at the details, the way the baseboards met the floor, clean, no gaps, the solid weight of the door, the quiet click of the handle. She turned to me. Her face was a map of wrinkles, and her eyes were sharp. She didn't say, "It's beautiful." She didn't say, "It's so big." She didn't say, "It must have cost a fortune." She smiled, a small, knowing smile. She reached out and patted my arm. "You made the house warm. Sloane," she said. That was it. That was the review. That was the validation I had been seeking my entire life, compressed into a single word. Not impressive, not successful. Warm. It was the word for the coffee shop. It was the feeling from the shed. It was the opposite of my childhood. Her words didn't just land, they resonated. They were a tuning fork that set my entire soul vibrating, settling all the frantic, dissonant chords that had been playing for 20 years. I had to blink, fast. "Dinner is in 10 minutes, Grandma," I managed to say. We gathered in the great room. The table was ready. This was the final, most important rule of the house, of the night. There was no head of the table. I had designed it that way. The table was a perfect democratic rectangle. The chairs, all 12 of them, were identical, with comfortable linen cushions, and my lighting, the strings of low-hung golden bulbs, was distributed evenly. There was no grand chandelier over one spot. There was no dim, forgotten end. Every single seat was the best seat in the house. Every single face was illuminated with the same soft, golden light. The spacing between each plate was generous. No one had to tuck in their elbows. There was room. There was, finally, enough room for everyone. Margaret and her team brought the food out on massive, heated earthenware platters. The salmon, the roasted vegetables, the fresh bread, the bowls of herb-infused butter. It was a feast. We all stood for a moment, the abundance laid out before us, the sound of the ocean roaring just feet away. I picked up my glass. Everyone followed. I looked at their faces. Eli, who was already talking to Sal about a photograph he'd taken of a rusted machine. Rachel, sketching on a napkin. Marion, who was actually smiling, watching her kids. Uncle Ray, Grandma Ruth. "I don't have a speech," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the waves. I want to thank you all for coming." I looked around the table, meeting every eye. "And I want to thank you for showing up. It means everything. Welcome." I raised my glass. "Welcome." The sound that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a dozen glasses clinking. It was the sound of conversation starting, not polite and hesitant, but immediate and real. And then, laughter. Eli made a joke. Sal laughed. A surprisingly loud, barking sound. Aunt Marianne laughed. The dinner began. It was loud. It was joyous. People passed the heavy platters, hand to hand. "You have to try this salmon. Can you pass the bread? Marion, tell us about your new garden." At one point, Uncle Ray tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted. "I just want to say," he said, his voice thick, "that I've worked with wood my whole life, and this," he patted the table, "is the finest piece of work I've ever had the honor to sit at." To Sloane. "To Sloane," they all echoed. The sound of the spoons tapping the glasses, the sound of the overlapping laughter, the sound of Lucas's guitar and June's violin weaving through it all, and the constant, powerful, rhythmic crash of the waves against the cliff. It all merged. It was no longer a collection of separate noises. It was a symphony. It was a single, powerful, coherent sound. My house, my fortress of glass and stone, was no longer just a structure. It was alive. It was breathing. It had a heartbeat. And it was the warmest place on earth. As the last of the salmon disappeared and the wine bottles emptied, a new atmosphere settled over the table. The warmth from the food and the low-hung lights created a circle of trust. The conversation, which had been bright and overlapping, softened. It was Sal, my old boss, who started it. He was looking at Eli's camera, which was sitting on the table. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "my old man told me photography was for rich kids. He said my hands were for a hammer, not a lens. Never held a camera in my life. Always wondered, though." Eli nodded, understanding. My dad said the same. He'd ask me, "Who's going to pay you to take pictures of rusty fences? Eli?" He just couldn't see it. A quiet chorus began. It was a confession, whispered around the 20-foot table. Marion, her face soft in the candlelight, spoke about her old book club. "After the divorce," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "they just stopped sending the invitations. Jenny said it was too awkward. I was the same person. I had read the same book. But I was suddenly too complicated. Aunt Marianne, who had been listening intently, reached over and patted her hand. My husband, well, he's a good man, but he calls my poetry my little hobby, like it's a collection of glass dolls. I had a piece published once, in a small journal. He asked me if it came with prize money. When I said no, he just shrugged. It was the sound of a dozen different lives that had been minimized. It was a room full of monkey wrenches, of people who were practical, or too artistic, or too complicated, or too quiet. People who had been deemed useful, but not central. And as the stories were told, a strange thing happened. There was no bitterness. There was no self-pity. There was laughter. It was a soft, sudden, surprising sound. It was the sound of release. Marian laughed as she described the awful store-bought cookies at the book club she was no longer invited to. Eli laughed as he pantomimed his father's confusion over a beautifully composed abstract photo. It was the liberated laugh of people realizing they were not alone in the shed. They were not the only ones relegated to the kids' table. The invisible weight, the one they had all been carrying alone, was suddenly shared. It became light. Margaret and her team cleared the plates, moving with a quiet grace. Then she brought dessert. It wasn't a complex, architectural tower of chocolate. It was a simple, rustic lemon tart, the kind with a high, imperfect crust, dusted with powdered sugar, and it was made by Aunt Marianne. "You brought it!" I exclaimed. "You think I'd come to a housewarming without my secret weapon?" She smiled. Margaret placed it in the center of the table. The candlelight from the row of candles shivered across the faces of my friends, my real family. The light was kind. It was a forgiving light, one that made everyone look like the best version of themselves, their eyes bright, their faces soft. The sharp, clean scent of the lemon cut through the rich memory of the dinner. "All right," Eli said, standing up and grabbing his camera. "Everyone, outside, now." "Eli, it's dark," Marian protested. "It's not dark," he said, his eyes alive. "It's perfect. Trust me. Grab your glasses." We trooped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool, and the sound of the ocean was immense, a dark, roaring presence just beyond the glass rail. Eli turned and looked back at the house. The great room, with the glass wall completely gone, was a cavern of impossible warmth. The strings of golden bulbs I had hung were reflected in the polished concrete floor, and again in the high-gloss ceiling, making it look as if the room were filled with a net of captured stars. "There," Eli said, pointing. "Everyone huddle up, right in the opening. I want the house behind you." We gathered, a clumsy, laughing group. Sal put his arm around Uncle Ray. Marian pulled her kids in front of her. Grandma Ruth stood next to me, small and solid. I put my arm around her. "Hold it," Eli said, backing up, focusing the lens. "Sloan, smile. I mean it. A real one." I did. I let the warmth of my grandmother's shoulder, the sound of Sal's gruff laugh, the sight of Aunt Marianne standing tall. I let it all land. The flash went off, a silent explosion of white light that froze us for one perfect, eternal second. We were a constellation of the discarded, framed by a galaxy of our own making. As everyone drifted back to the table for tart and coffee, I stayed on the terrace, my phone in my hand. I looked at the picture Eli had just sent me. It was perfect. The light, the smiles, the sense of belonging. My thumb moved. I opened the group text. "Carrington family." The last text was my mother's, from yesterday. "Skipping your housewarming." I tapped the icon to attach the photo. I watched the progress bar load. Then I typed the caption. It was only 5 words. "Tonight, everyone had a seat." I hit send. I felt my phone vibrate with the confirmation. I stood there, looking out at the black, invisible ocean. I didn't feel a thrill of revenge. I didn't feel spiteful or smug. I felt a click, like a door locking, a heavy iron door. It was not a provocation. It was a fact. It was a piece of evidence. It was the closing statement in a trial I had not even realized I was holding. It was, simply, the truth. The rest of the night was a blur of good coffee, sharp lemon tart, and quiet conversation. One by one, I showed my guests to their rooms, the rooms I had prepared just for them. The house grew quiet, settling into its first night as a true, full home. I fell asleep in my own bed, the sound of the waves finally lulling me to a deep, dreamless rest. I woke to the smell of coffee. The morning light was clear and bright. I walked out into the great room to find a beautiful domestic chaos. Marion's kids were on the floor, reading. Uncle Ray was showing Eli the hidden joinery in the staircase. Grandma Ruth was sitting on the terrace, wrapped in her wool blanket, watching the gulls. The group was quiet, a little hungover from wine and emotion, reading the paper, sipping coffee. It was a perfect, lazy Sunday. My phone rang. It was the producer from Homecraft. "Sloan, you are not going to believe this." His voice was electric. "I just got a call from the network president. The president. He saw the final cut of your episode. He's pulling tonight's scheduled programming. He's airing your episode. Tonight, prime time." I dropped the coffee mug. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "What? Tonight? But the promos, They don't care. They're cutting a promo right now. It will air all day. This is it. Sloan, this is the big one. Congratulations. Just stay by your phone." He hung up. Everyone was staring at me. "The episode," I said, my voice shaking. "The show about the house. It's airing. Tonight." A cheer went up. Eli was the first to speak. "Well, we're not going anywhere. Then, we have to watch it. We have to watch it here." A fresh jolt of energy shot through the house. We had a new purpose. We weren't going to huddle around the 80-inch television I had hidden in the media room. That felt wrong. "The terrace," I said. "We'll watch it on the terrace." We spent the afternoon preparing. Eli, a tech wizard, had his portable projector. I went to the workshop and found a massive 10-foot by 10-foot canvas drop cloth, the one I used for painting. We stretched it between two of the main steel columns of the terrace, creating a giant, makeshift movie screen. As evening approached, we brought out every blanket and pillow in the house. We built a nest. Margaret, who had returned to clean up, got caught in the excitement and stayed, making a massive pot of real hot cocoa, the kind made with melted chocolate and cinnamon. Marion's kids, in their pajamas, claimed the front row cushions. We sat there, a small, huddled tribe, wrapped in wool, sipping cocoa, the cool night air on our faces. Eli aimed the projector. The show started. There was music, a sweeping, cinematic score, and then the shot, the one the producer had spent a whole day capturing. It was a drone shot, starting from a mile out at sea. It flew low over the violent, white-capped waves, moving faster and faster toward the dark, jagged cliffs. The music swelled, and then, at the last second, the camera tilted and soared, climbing the sheer 60-foot rock face. A collective, audible gasp went up from our group. On the giant screen, my house was revealed. Clinging to the precipice, its lights blazing against the purple twilight, it looked impossible. It looked like a miracle. Even Sal, who had helped build it, whispered, "Holy hell!" The episode was beautiful. It showed the before shots, the rusted, collapsing shack. It showed me in my hard hat, welding. It showed Miguel laying the bead on the staircase. It showed Cal, sanding the oak table. It showed the storm, with the audio of the wind roaring. And then it showed the after, the clean lines, the light, the warmth. The show ended with a slow pan across the invisible glass railing, the setting sun, and the table, set for dinner. The narrator's warm, professional voice came on. In the end, Sloan Carrington didn't just rebuild a house, she rebuilt a philosophy. She proved that the most discarded things, the things we write off as broken, often hold the most strength, because the truest home is not built from glass and steel, but from the courage to finally open a table long enough. The credits rolled. No one spoke. There was just the sound of the real waves crashing on the rocks below us, a perfect echo of the show. Grandma Ruth reached over in the dark and squeezed my hand. And then, the silence was broken. A sound, a low, incensed, angry buzzing. It was my phone, sitting on the stone-side table. It was vibrating so hard against the basalt that it was rattling, the noise cutting through the night air. The screen lit up. A text from Mom, a millisecond later. A text from Dad, a millisecond later. A text from Lena. They were coming in, one after another, a flood of notifications, stacking up, pushing each other off the screen. I didn't read them. I just watched them arrive. Then, I tapped the last one, the one from my mother. The message, glowing white in the darkness, was seared into my brain. The whole town is watching this. Everyone is calling the house. Why didn't you tell us? Sloan, people are asking why we weren't there. The buzzing of the phone on the stone was a violation. It was the only sound in a silence so complete it felt like a vacuum, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of the surf. Everyone on the terrace, my small tribe of friends, was frozen, their faces illuminated in the projector's blue afterglow, watching me. I looked down at the screen, at the cascade of messages from Mom, Dad, and Lena, at the final, accusing text from my mother. People are asking why we weren't there. My hands were perfectly steady. The old, familiar ache of adrenaline, the fight-or-flight panic I used to feel, was gone. I felt nothing but a profound, cold clarity. I was no longer the child in the shed, hoping to be noticed. I was the architect of the fortress, and the alarm had just been sounded at the gate. I swiped the screen and typed a reply to my mother's text. I did invite you. I called 2 weeks ago. I invited all of you. Yesterday. You texted me to say you were skipping it to help Lena hang pictures in her new apartment. I hit send. I didn't even have time to set the phone down. The screen instantly lit up. Mom? Incoming call. It rang once, twice, a shrill, demanding sound in the peaceful night air. Eli, sitting on a cushion, spoke, his voice low. Sloan, you don't have to answer that. I looked past him, to Grandma Ruth. She was sitting in the deck chair I'd placed for her, still wrapped in the wool blanket. She was watching me, her eyes as clear and sharp as I'd ever seen them. She knew exactly what this was. I walked over to her. I didn't say anything. I just showed her the screen. She looked at the caller ID. She looked back at me. A small, grim smile touched her lips. Well, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I believe you'd better answer that, Sloan. And you put me on the line. Put it on speaker. I nodded. I walked to the center of the terrace. I took a deep breath of the cold, salt air. I pressed the green accept icon, and then I pressed the speaker icon. My mother's voice, high and frantic, shattered the night. Sloan, are you there? What is going on? Your father is getting calls from the mayor. The mayor? Frank, who else called? The Chamber of Commerce. Everyone in Amber Field is calling us. Why didn't you tell us? I stood by the glass railing, my back to the ocean. I did tell you. Mom, I told you I was having a housewarming. A housewarming? You said you were having a small dinner. You never, ever said it was a television event. Sloan, what was that? It makes us look like we abandoned you. Everyone is asking. They're asking why we weren't there. Her voice was circular, panicked. It was the sound of someone whose reflection had been shattered, and they were scrambling to piece it back together. It wasn't a television event, Mom. It was a dinner. The dinner I invited you, Dad and Lena to. The dinner you declined. I did not, she shot back, her voice sharp with denial. I said we were busy. You're twisting my words. You always do this. You've always been dramatic, making things into this, that whole show. It was a montage. It's not the truth. They edited it to make us look bad. I'm not twisting anything, I said. My voice was low, and it did not shake. The entire terrace was silent. My friends caught in this drama, their faces lit by the warm golden lights from the great room. You texted me, Mom, on Friday, at 4:15 in the afternoon. Do you remember what you wrote? I said we couldn't make it. Lena needed us. I'll read it to you, I said. I swiped from the call to the text message. I held the phone up. I read her words into the night. Going to have to skip the housewarming. Your sister just moved into her new apartment. It's a big weekend for her, and she needs help hanging pictures. We're driving down to help her. A thick, heavy silence fell on the line. It was so quiet, I could hear my father's agitated breathing in the background. Then, Grandma Ruth's voice, from her chair. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was the sound of a judge delivering a final verdict. "Stop it, Judy!" My mother gasped. "Mother, are you there? What is this? Is she with you? Sloan, what have you done? Is this an ambush?" "I am right here," Grandma said, her voice carrying on the speakerphone, sharp as sea glass. "I am sitting on the terrace of the most magnificent home I have ever set foot in, and I am telling you, as your mother, to stop. I have watched you do this for 30 years. "Do what?" my mother cried, her voice cracking. "I haven't done anything. I have always loved my children. I have always supported them. We... "You have always supported one of them," Grandma Ruth cut in, "and you have always used the other as a utility. Do you remember Christmas, Judy, when Sloan was 14 years old? You and Frank bought Lena a full set of new ski equipment, the boots, the skis, the jacket. It cost over $1,000, and you forgot Sloan's gift. You forgot, and when you realized it on Christmas morning, Frank went to the drugstore and bought her a $20 gift card for shampoo. I was there. I watched her open it. I watched her say thank you while Lena modeled her new ski pants. "Now, hold on, Mother," my father's voice, blustering, angry. "That was one time. It was a mistake." "Was it a mistake, Frank?" Grandma's voice was relentless. "When she won the district science fair? That solar car she built herself in that rotting shed? While you were watching a tape of Lena's dance recital? I was there. I saw her walk in with the blue ribbon, and you shushed her. You told her to put it on the counter. You told her not to make a fuss while you rewound the tape to watch Lena do a clumsy cartwheel. That's not... Lena was so... And was it a mistake?" Grandma continued, her voice rising. "When Lena's cheerleading squad lost the regional qualifier, and you threw her a $500 commiseration party with catering because she was so disappointed? While Sloan was working 40 hours a week at a woodshop to pay for her own college textbooks because you told her you couldn't afford to help? That's not fair," my mother shrieked. "That's not how it was. Lena is sensitive. She's fragile. Sloan is strong. She's different. She could always handle it." The words, the exact words, the wallpaper of my childhood, now screamed into the night. "There it is," Grandma Ruth said, her voice filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "The excuse, you didn't make her strong. Judy, you forced her to be, and then you used that strength as your permission to forget her. Fairness. Fairness isn't something you get to demand when a television camera catches you. It's not a word you get to use when you are finally seen for what you are. Fairness is what you practice when no one is watching." The silence that followed was a living thing. It was a cold, salt mist that enveloped us. I heard a single, strangled sound from the phone, a sob. "I'm going to tell you something else," Grandma said, her voice dropping, confessional, but steel hard. "Because I am done. I am done watching this. I am done being silent." "Mother, please," my mom whispered. "Please don't." "When your father and I set up the inheritance trusts," Grandma said, ignoring her, "I proposed a business starter fund, $50,000 for each of the girls, for when they turn 25, a joint fund, to be split equally, $100,000 total." I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to ice. $50,000. I thought of the overheated computer. I thought of the nights I'd slept on the workbench, using a bag of sawdust as a pillow. I thought of the terror of taking out the loan against Second Horizon. $50,000. It would have changed everything. Do you remember that, Judy? Frank? Grandma asked. You told me it was a wonderful idea, and then, 6 months later, you petitioned the bank. You had the terms changed. You took the entire amount, all $100,000, and you gave it to Lena. That was an investment, my father shouted. It was for her lifestyle brand, her startup. It was for a website that sold 3 t-shirts and then failed in a month, Grandma snapped. But that is not the point. The point is, you took Sloane's half. You didn't just forget her. You stole from her. And your reason. I remember it exactly. You said, Lena needs this. She's weaker. She can't handle the world like Sloane can. Sloane will find a way. She always does. It hit me. It wasn't just a lack of support. It wasn't just neglect. It was an active, financial decision. They didn't just fail to give me a hand up. They took away the floor I was supposed to have and forced me to build my fortress from the bedrock, with my bare, bleeding hands. And in that moment, I realized I had built it anyway. The sound from the phone was no longer a sob. It was a desperate, ugly crying. It was my mother. I thought you didn't need it, she wailed. I thought you were fine. You were always so strong. You never asked for anything. I thought you didn't need us. I looked out at the dark ocean. The waves crashed. The house stood. My friends sat in the warm light, witnesses to my entire, excavated life. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, and all the exhaustion of my entire life was gone, replaced by a simple, unshakable calm, the heavy, heavy burden of waiting for them to see me. It just evaporated. It was gone. You were right, Mom, I said. I didn't need it. Sloane, she gasped. Sloane, please, we're proud. We are so proud of you. We'll drive up tomorrow. We'll be there in the morning. We want to see it. We want to see you. I looked around the terrace, at Eli, who was wiping a tear from his own eye, at Sal, who was staring at his boots, his jaw tight, at Marion, who was watching me with a look of fierce, profound understanding, at all the people who had shown up. No, I said. What? No, the house isn't open tomorrow. It's full. My guests are staying for the weekend. Sloane, don't do this. It's not about winning, Mom, I said, and I meant it. The victory was not in their defeat. The victory was in the house. It was in the table. It was in the faces around me. It's not about you losing. I'm done. I don't need anyone to lose for me to be seen. I pressed the red end call icon. The speakerphone clicked off. The night was silent again, except for the ocean. I stood there, my hand still on my phone. Grandma Ruth slowly got to her feet. She walked over, took the phone gently from my hand, and set it on the table. She put her small, warm hand on my arm. Well, she said, her voice clear and bright in the night air. That was quite a show, but I believe there is still some of that lemon tart left, and I'd like another cup of coffee. The week after the party was a strange, vibrating calm. The house was quiet, but my phone was not. The other group text, the one I had created, the one Eli had cheekily named the Long Table Alliance, was on fire. It was a constant stream of life. Eli sent a photo of the portfolio he'd finally submitted to a gallery. Aunt Marianne shared a new poem she'd written. Inspired by the sound of the waves, Marion sent a picture of her kid's drawing of the ocean pool. Sal sent a picture of a perfect dovetail joint, with the simple caption, "Almost as good as yours." They were already planning. Next year, same weekend. I'm bringing a pie. I'll make the playlist. They were building a tradition, a new set of memories, on the foundation I had laid. The Carrington family group text, however, was a digital tomb. After my final no, there was nothing, a void of silence, my mother, my father, my sister, nothing. For 7 days, I let the silence sit. I let it stretch. I worked. I walked the cliffs. I sat in my study and looked at my little, scarred table from the shed. I let the humiliation and anger from the phone call drain out of me, leaving only the hard, clean bedrock of my decision. The boundary was holding. On the following Sunday, exactly 1 week after the disastrous phone call, I picked up my phone. I opened the silent family text. I wrote a new message. It was not an olive branch. It was a blueprint. I am making dinner next Sunday at 7, just the 4 of us. If you want to come and talk, really talk, the table will be open. I sent it. The reply from my father was almost immediate. We'll be there. I spent that week preparing, but in a totally different way. I didn't plan a feast. I didn't buy flowers. I didn't hire musicians. This was not a performance. It was an interrogation. When Sunday evening arrived, I did not slide the great glass wall open. I kept it closed. The ocean was visible, but it was separate, a silent, powerful witness behind the glass. I lit the indoor fireplace, the one near the small dining area, away from the grand 20-foot oak table. I was shrinking the space. I was creating a container. I didn't cook an elaborate meal. I baked a loaf of heavy, rustic bread. I made a large pot of fish chowder, thick with potatoes and leeks. I baked 4 fillets of cod, simply, with lemon and butter. The house smelled of bread and fire, not of performance. They arrived at 7, exactly. The sound of their car on the gravel was an intrusion. I opened the door. They stood on the steps, looking small and alien. My father, my mother, Lena, they were not the titans of my childhood. They were just 3 people, looking cold and uncertain. My mother was holding a small, foil-wrapped plate. It's just some brownies from a mix, she said, her voice a whisper. Thank you, Mom, I said. Come in. They stepped inside. They were silent. They looked up at the steel staircase. They touched the basalt island. They looked at the fire. They were tourists in my life. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the small, round table I had set by the fire. We ate in a heavy, painful silence. There was only the sound of spoons against the ceramic bowls, the crackle of the fire. The warmth was in the room, but not between us. My father was the first to break. He set his spoon down. He looked at his hands, then at me. The house, he started. He stopped. He cleared his throat. Sloan, what your grandmother said, about the science fair, about all of it, she was right. I met his gaze. I said nothing. I just waited. It was easy to look away, he said, his voice thick. Lena was loud. She was always there, needing. And you were just so capable. You were so strong. I thought you were fine. I made myself believe you were fine, because it was easier. It was easier for me. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was a convenience, my convenience, and that was a profound failure as a father. I am so sorry. I nodded. Once, I accepted the fact. It was not an absolution. It was a testimony. My mother started to cry, but quietly. She was twisting her napkin in her lap. I didn't know how to be proud of you, she whispered, her words tumbling out. I'm not like you. I don't understand. Gears, or wood, or structure. I understood Lena. I understood the glitter, the applause, the dance. That was a pride I knew how to hold. When you took that clock apart, I just saw a mess. I didn't see you. She looked up, her face streaked. I didn't know how to be proud, with words, only with baking, and you were never there to bake for. I want to learn how. I don't know if you'll let me, but I want to learn. I looked at them, the 2 people who had defined my world by their absence, and I felt a quiet. Then Lena spoke. Her voice was shaking, and it held the familiar sharp edge of defensiveness. You left, she said, her eyes on the fire. You were just Gone. You went to that college and you never came back. You hated us. I thought you just wanted to be away from me." I turned to her. My little sister, the star. "I was always talking." "Lena," I said, my voice soft, but cold as the steel outside. "But I wasn't talking in a language you were taught to listen to. I was talking when I won the science fair. I was talking when I graduated with honors. I was talking when I called home to tell Mom I'd finished the Gray Coast cabin, and she shushed me to tell me about your car commercial. I was speaking, constantly, but you were the only one in the house who was allowed to be heard." I paused, letting the words land. I didn't just leave, I was erased. So I left to go build a place where I was allowed to exist. The silence that followed was absolute. The confessions were done. They had all testified. I stood up. "There's one more thing." I walked away from the table, away from the fire, into the shadows of the great room. I went to my study. They watched me, confused. I grabbed it. I dragged it out across the polished concrete floor. The sound was a loud, ugly, scraping, a violation of the perfect room. I dragged my old, crooked, wobbly table from the shed, the one with the one short leg, the one with my original saw marks, the one I had sanded down to a scarred, imperfect silk. I dragged it into the center of the room, between the fireplace and the basalt island. It looked like a piece of driftwood, a refugee, in the middle of my $6 million villa. My mother gasped. What is that?" "This," I said, running my hand over the scarred wood, "is the only table I ever had in your house. It was in the shed. I built it myself. A seat for this table. A seat for me. Never existed in the main house." I walked back to the kitchen, took a single, clean plate, a napkin, and silverware. I walked back to the crooked table, and I set a single, perfect, solitary place. "Tonight," I said, my voice echoing in the large space, "I am setting it myself." I turned to them. They were staring at the table, as if it were a ghost. "This is the new rule," I said. "This is the blueprint for how we exist. If we are to exist at all, there is no more kids' table. There is no more end of the table. There are no more invisible seats. There are no more seats of privilege at the head. And there will be no more public comparisons." I looked at my mother. "You will not tell me about Lena's wins in public." I looked at my father. "You will not use my strength as an excuse to look away." I looked at Lena. "You will learn to listen." I pointed to the small, crooked table. "You are all welcome in this house. This house has many, many seats, but you are not welcome to rank its occupants. You are not welcome to decide who is the star and who is the wrench. In this house, the wrench built the walls. The wrench is the star. My scale is broken." They just stared. My father, his face pale. My mother, her tears stopped, her eyes wide. Lena, looking at the small, ugly table as if it had personally attacked her. My father was the first to move. He stood up. He walked over to the small table. He looked at it. He looked at me. And he nodded. Slowly, a single, heavy nod. I understand," he said, his voice hoarse. My mother stood, pulling her napkin through her hands. She nodded, too, a quick, jerky, terrified motion. Lena said nothing. She just stared at the floor. It was not forgiveness. It was not a reunion. There were no hugs. No one said, "It's all okay now." It was not okay. It was broken. But it was, finally, honest. It was a commitment. It was the first, terrifying, necessary step in drafting a new foundation. I walked them to the door. The night air was cold. "Thank you for the brownies, Mom," I said. "Good night, Sloan," my father said. He wouldn't meet my eye. They got in their car and drove away, their headlights cutting a small, weak path through the immense, coastal darkness. I closed the door. I did not slam it. I heard the heavy, solid, expensive sound of the custom-engineered lock. A soft, final, satisfying click. The boundary was set. The door was closed. Love, if it was going to exist, would now exist on my terms, with clear, written, non-negotiable conditions. The architect's conditions. The episode's airing changed the texture of my life. Second Horizon was no longer a niche. Local studio. The phone at the warehouse rang off the hook. We were getting inquiries from all over the country, from people who didn't just want a house, but who wanted a Second Horizon home, a place that felt warm. The Homecraft Network was ecstatic. The Coastal Rebirth episode was their highest-rated premiere in 5 years. They immediately ordered a follow-up, a special feature on how the house was being lived in. Just a small thing. Sloan? The producer, Ben, had said, "We just want to get some shots of the house with people in it. You, your friends, that amazing table. We want to show the life of the space." I was hesitant. I had protected this space so fiercely, but I also owed them. They had seen me when no one else was looking. "All right," I agreed. One night, a small gathering, 2 camera crew, maximum, no sit-down interviews, just observation. You get what you get. So, I planned a second open house. I sent a new text to the Long Table Alliance. I also, with some trepidation, invited a few of my new neighbors from the small coastal town, people who had been curious and kind. And then, I sent the invitation to the Carrington family text group. The blueprint was the same. Dinner, Saturday at 7, everyone is welcome, the table is open. This time, the reply was different. It wasn't a list of excuses, it was just my father. "We will be there. Thank you for the invitation." The night of the party arrived. The house was humming. The old crew, Eli, Sal, Marion, Grandma Ruth, Aunt Marianne, Uncle Ray, had come early. They were the hosts, the anchors. They were showing the new neighbors around, telling the stories of the build. This staircase? Miguel welded that in one piece. This table? Sloan and I built this at the shop. The Homecraft crew was there, as promised. 2 cameramen, quiet as ghosts, moved around the periphery, their lenses capturing the low golden light, the steam rising from Margaret's food, the faces of people laughing. The great glass wall was slid halfway open, letting in the sound of the surf, but keeping out the chill of the late autumn air. At 7 o'clock, on the dot, a single, modest sedan pulled up the drive, not the showy SUV they used to drive. The doorbell rang. I opened it. My father, my mother, and Lena stood on the doorstep. They looked nervous. My mother was not wearing her usual, sharp, event clothes. She was in a simple sweater. Lena's face was pale, and she wasn't wearing her usual bright look-at-me makeup. And in my mother's hands, there was no large, ostentatious bouquet of flowers, the kind that are meant for a centerpiece. Instead, she was holding a simple, Tupperware-style container. I made brownies, my mother said, her voice small, holding the box out to me. The from-scratch kind, with the walnuts you used to like. I looked at the box. It was still warm. I could feel the heat through the plastic. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "Come in." They stepped inside. The party paused for a second. The music, the conversation, dipped. Grandma Ruth gave them a single, sharp, assessing look from her chair by the fire. I took the box of brownies and placed it on the basalt counter, next to Margaret's artful creations. My parents and Lena stood awkwardly in the entryway, a small, tight island of unease in the warm, flowing room. They were, for the first time in their lives, not the center of the universe. They were just guests. My father cleared his throat and walked over to Uncle Ray, his brother. "Ray," he said, his voice rough. That's a fine-looking fire." Uncle Ray nodded. "Sloan built a good flue." Dinner was served. The long oak table was full. We had added a small extension. The cameramen were filming from a distance as we all sat, the platters moving from hand to hand. I had placed my parents and Lena not at the end, not at the center, but just as part of the flow. They were between Sal and Aunt Marianne. They were integrated. They were quiet, They listened. They passed the bread when asked. Then, as the main course was being cleared, my mother, her hands visibly shaking, stood up. The room went quiet. The cameras, which had been in the corner, discreetly turned toward her. I just, she stammered, looking not at me, but at the table, at the linen runner. I know I'm not. I just wanted to say something. She took a shaky breath. For a long time, our family table, the one I was in charge of, it was too small. Her eyes met mine, just for a second, and they were swimming. It wasn't the table's fault. It was mine. I made it small. I decided who got the good seats, and I left people at the edge. I left my own daughter at the edge. I am so sorry. Sloane. She was crying now, tears dropping onto the oak. This is the most beautiful table I have ever seen, and I am so grateful to be allowed to sit at it. She sat down, her face in her hands. A heavy silence fell over the room. My father stood up, placing his hand on my mother's shaking shoulder. He looked around the table, at all of us. What your mother is trying to say, he said, his voice thick, is that we were wrong. We got it wrong. We thought we knew what family looked like, and we were arrogant. We were blind. He looked at me. If we have to learn how to sit at the edge of the table, if we have to earn our way back, one seat at a time, we are willing to learn. We're willing to try. He sat down. It was a raw, public, agonizing confession. Ben, the producer, was on his feet in an instant. This was television gold. This was the real story. He and his cameraman moved in, the red recording light on, the lens focusing on my mother's bowed head, on my father's grim face, on me. Sloane, Ben whispered, his voice urgent with excitement. This is it. This is the ending. Just talk to them. Respond. This is so real. The camera zoomed in on my face. The entire room was watching. My parents, my friends, the neighbors, the crew. I looked at the bright red light, the single, unblinking eye that would validate this moment for the world, the eye that would capture my victory. I held up my hand. No, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through everything. Ben froze. What? No, I said again, my voice firm, looking right at him. Not this. This part is not for the cameras. I turned to the cameraman. Please, turn it off. The cameraman looked at Ben. Ben looked at me, his face a mask of disbelief. Sloane, this is the whole story. This, I said, pointing to my mother, is my family. This is not a stories. This is just work, hard work, and it's private. Turn off the camera. A long, tense second passed. Ben stared at me. He saw the unyielding line of my jaw. He saw the steel in my eyes. He was not looking at a talent. He was looking at the architect of the house. And in my house, I made the rules. He sighed. He gave a sharp, frustrated nod to his cameraman. The cameraman lowered the heavy broadcast camera from his shoulder. The bright, intrusive red light clicked off. The public event was over. The private one was just beginning. I let the silence sit. I let my parents breathe in it. I let them feel the absence of the lens, the absence of performance. Then, I looked down the long democratic table. I saw an empty chair. It was in the middle, between Eli and Marion's son, Leo, who had been sitting so quietly, his eyes wide, barely touching his food. I stood up. I walked over and pulled the chair out. The sound of its legs scraping on the concrete was the only noise. I turned to the room. My friends, my family, my neighbors. In this house, I said, my voice clear and strong, there is no seat of honor. There is no head of the V table. There is only the right seat, and the right seat is for the person who hasn't been heard yet. I looked down at Leo, Marion's shy, 8-year-old son. He was staring at his plate, clutching a Lego figure in his hand. Leo, I said gently, He looked up, his eyes terrified. I smiled. I heard you built an entire space station out of Legos this week, and I heard it has a rotating, cantilevered docking bay. He nodded, a tiny, jerky motion. I think, I said, pulling the chair out for him, that you should take this seat, and I think you should tell us about it, all of us, before dessert. We want to hear about the engineering. Marion's jaw dropped. Leo looked at his mom, who was crying silently with a look of stunned gratitude. He slowly slid off his chair, walked over, and climbed into the empty seat, a seat now at the very center of the adult world. A small, hesitant smile touched his lips. Well, he began, his voice high and small. The docking bay was tricky, because the tensile strength. A warm, gentle laugh rippled through the room. It was not a laugh at him. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. It was the sound of the last, invisible, ancient string of the old hierarchy, the one that separated the important from the small, the star from the wrench, the adult table from the kids' table. Snapping. It broke, softly, and dissolved. Grandma Ruth, her eyes shining, raised her wineglass high. To the long table, she said, her voice ringing out. To the long table, the room echoed, and the sound of 20 glasses clinking was a bell. I walked to the wall. I put my hand on the cold steel frame of the great glass door, and I pushed. With a low, satisfying rumble, the 70-foot wall of glass slid away, disappearing completely into the stone. The night air rushed in, clean, cold, and tasting of salt and freedom. The sound of the ocean, the roar of the world, filled the room. Everyone at the table, in one unspoken motion, turned their chairs slightly, looking out, looking past the terrace, past the rail, to the clean, unbroken line of the dark horizon. I picked up my phone. I opened the Carrington family text. I typed one last message, a final, closing piece of the blueprint. The table is set. Anyone who wants to sit can, but no one gets to stand in someone else's view. I put the phone in my pocket. When I looked up, my father was passing the brownies. My mother was listening, truly, deeply listening, as Sal told her about the grain of the white oak, and Lena, her head bowed, was watching Leo, who was now using his fork to demonstrate how the docking bay worked. She was, for the first time in her life, just listening. I smiled. It was not a smile of triumph. It was not for the cameras. It was not for the applause. It was the quiet, solid, anchored smile of a master builder who has just checked the final level, seen the bubble float to the perfect center, and knows, deep in her bones, that the foundation is true. The house would hold. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm so curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please, drop a comment below. Let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and maybe even support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by so many more people.